Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Maestros Musings. I'm Geraldine Parent, Executive Director, and it's indeed a delight to see you all back with us again. Unfortunately, due to a scheduling change, we have pre-recorded this Maestros Musings in advance of tomorrow's actually scheduled date. And so there won't be as much of a question period time frame today, but we know Rosemary is so eloquent in asking the right questions that I'm sure we'll have heard all the answers from Ivars, our special guest today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rosemary Thompson to begin our conversation.
Thank you, Geraldine. I'm just so excited today to have Ivars Torrens here as our guest on Maestros Musings. I had the great pleasure of preparing the chorus for the Messiah several years in a row. I was going to count. I think it was about 6 years in a row that I got to hand the chorus over to Ivars and watch his magic, his extraordinary ability to bring them to such heights musically, and I learned so much from him. Ivars Torrens is the founding director of the Tafel Music Chamber Choir, which is now celebrating its 40th anniversary season, and that's an incredible feat in and of itself. But he was also a founding member of the Tafel Music Orchestra and played principal viola with them for the first 23 years of their direction, of their existence. He is an extraordinary guest conductor and in demand. He conducts across the country orchestras and choral ensembles. He was the principal Baroque conductor of the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra for 10 years, and that was when I was in my tenure as the resident conductor and the chorus master. So I'm so grateful that we overlapped with that. Besides many appearances with the Tafel Music Orchestra and other continuous guest conducting, some of his notable appearances were with the Symphony Nova Scotia's 2019 Mozart Festival. He conducted the Handel Messiah for Ernie Music Vancouver just before the pandemic shut us all down in December 2019, which featured the Pacific Baroque Orchestra. And he also has performed with his choir and recorded many works by Canadian composers, not just Baroque era composers. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. He was nominated for a 2011 Gemini Award for his performance as George Frederick Handel. And once you've seen Ivars perform as George Frederick Handel, it is unforgettable. I have a few funny stories to tell if you will let me later on in the interview. He is also an extraordinary teacher and lecturer. He teaches orchestral conducting at the University of Toronto, and he's also on the faculty of the Glenn Gould School. He has conducted many youth choirs, both provincial youth choirs and the National Youth Choir in Canada. And I'm so thrilled that he will also be conducting a masterclass while he's here with us. Ivars will be our guest conductor at our upcoming concert of Bach's Playlist, 19th of November in Kelowna, the 20th of November in Vernon, and the 21st of November in Penticton, which is a matinee at 2 p.m. And on Saturday afternoon, Ivars will be doing a masterclass for string players, young string students, on anything from the Baroque repertoire. He is an extraordinary musician, artist, human being, and just so thrilled to have him here today. Welcome, Ivars. Thank you for joining us.
Not at all. Wonderful to be here and wonderful to see you, Rose, again. After this delay that we've had, we would have met a few months ago if everything hadn't caved in, but I'm really looking forward to this.
So excited to have you with us. And I just want to start by asking you two main questions. First of all, how did you get into conducting? What do you love about it? Just tell me a little bit about your conducting.
Oh my. Well, I think it goes back quite far in that I always wanted to I was less interested in making music on my own. I did play piano, but making music with other people was really something that attracted me. And I was already organizing things in senior public school, primary school, towards the end, high school, little vocal ensembles. By the time I came to university, I caught the Baroque period performance practice, original instruments craze, the bug, and decided to create an ensemble of my own with colleagues I played with. I was in a string quartet. And again, that was a way of expressing myself in through music with other people. Once you get bigger than a quartet, then then you're organizing and you're directing. I remember taking over also classes from my high school music teacher when I was in grade 13. He'd be too busy. He knew I was interested in that, so it sort of just developed naturally. And I remember seeing conductors as a kid and in my youth, and seeing the communication that happens purely through gesture with an orchestra or a choir, and that kind of blew me away. So I never thought about, oh, I want to be a conductor kind of thing. And now, I mean, I could almost ask you the same question about how this thing that we do, wave our arms around, that if we did on a subway, it would certainly clear the car. I mean, how did you?
Well, so much parallel that as you're talking, right to grade 13, which, people will think grade 13, same kind of thing, just sort of fell into it. And I think also because of that love of making music with other people, it's something that really, really resonated with me. I don't know if you know this, Ivars, but when I was a student at Western University for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I heard your lecture about performance practice.
Oh, right, yes.
And it really transformed my thinking. And to this day, I'm not in any way a Baroque specialist. I've learned so much from you and from others. And I love listening to Baroque music, but I mostly choose not to perform it myself because I don't have the really innate specialty, and I haven't done that study to really know what to ask for. So as you said, this, for people who don't really understand what that Baroque specialty is, could you just give us a little bit of a picture of what it is that when you're approaching Baroque music, you're really looking for, and how we want to divest ourselves of the 200 years of traditions that got piled on to that Baroque music, like how we're trying to find our way back to what it would have been in the day that it was written?
Right. Well, I remember growing up listening to Baroque music, Bach and Handel, and it was of course played by groups like the Philadelphia Orchestra and Pablo Casals, the Marlborough Orchestra, Glenn Gould, with an ensemble, and I didn't think twice about stylistic matters. It was just another extension of music making. And so whether it was Mozart or Beethoven or Bach, it was just music, and it was beautiful music. And then I remember I had an epiphany, which was a very quiet one, but you could call it like a thunderbolt in terms of how it made me think again about what I was hearing. And you'll find that a lot of people who do specialize in period performance practice, that's what we call it. We call ourselves HIP. We're very hip. Historically informed performance. And so it's an attitude. But going back to my first epiphany, a friend of mine played a recording of a small little Telemann concerto for 4 solo violins, and was being played on period instruments, in period style, and the sounds just blew me away. It bore no relation to music that I had heard, the sounds that were being created, and because of that, the emotion that it created in the music. It's a small little piece, but that world opened up, and then that intrigued me. I wanted to know more. Well, what are these instruments they're playing? And why are they playing that way? But my initial thought was, yes, this sounds right. This now makes sense. Whereas before, I thought, okay, this is just music, and you play it like anything else, and maybe you play it a little more vigorously. and before I heard any period ensembles, I liked the kind of crisp playing of Carl Richter or Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, and that was a development in itself on how to approach this music. So for me, the idea of using an instrument, a tool that the composers would be familiar with to create the music, and then also to learn about how this music that's sitting on a page, how to bring it to life in a way that they would understand, that they would recognize. Because if you realize that musical notation isn't a standard thing, we kind of treat it that way, but it fluctuated and changed. And so you can, let's use a metaphor, 3 letters, T-O-N.
T-O-N?
Yes.
Ton?
So
Ton.
ton.
Yeah.
Because we're immediately thinking, oh, English, ton.
Right.
But if you say T-O-N to a German, they'll go, oh,
Tone.
tone. That means
Tone.
sound or tone.
Yeah.
You say that to a French person, they'll go, oh, ton,
Tone.
which also means sound or a pronoun. So context is everything. And therefore, being able to know stylistically what the notation is telling you, what the composer and his milieu, his social milieu, were doing, and adding that to the tools they used, creates a completely different animal. In a way, it's like when we hear now, it's been going for a few years, but it's still a shocker to many people, hearing Shakespeare done, pronounced as English was in Shakespeare's time.
Right. So that it has a more authentic experience. And
it's a more authentic experience, but it is also a shocker because we all think of the great British actors like Gielgud and Olivier. Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt and resolve itself in that beautiful Shakespearean. That it's more like, if you listen to the Archers, get someone from Yorkshire, or Cockney or whatever. It's an earthy language.
Yeah.
Pronunciation is totally different, but then it actually brings you closer.
Well, I would absolutely agree. When you say it brings you closer, I think it is that authenticity that rings. It, to me, it frees the music from the confines of that written page, and so that it's the traditions of how it was interpreted in that day, because they knew there's so many fewer markings, like articulation markings or dynamic markings that then we see after we've gone through a romantic and then into a contemporary 20th century lens. So when you look at a piece of music from Baroque, you're seeing the patterns and you're seeing things beyond the bar lines. I know I'm getting a bit technical now, but that I don't always pick up on. I've learned a lot from you. I'm much better than I used to be, but that's why I can't wait to see you get in front of my orchestra, and some of whom really do have that passion as well for playing in that authentic performance. But I know they're going to learn so much from you and enjoy it a lot.
I would say myself that it's, if you consider that the music that was written was played by an ensemble that played together all the time.
Right.
They weren't playing music from other periods. So the style they played in, so think of a jazz ensemble. Think of Duke Ellington's band. They can play different tunes, but they have a style that they all know about. Right. So hardly anything needs to be written down except the notes.
Because they know exactly what, they know how to swing, they know,
Exactly. Well, swing isn't notated. If you notated it, it would look really messy.
Yeah.
Is not ba-ba-ba-be, as we would, a modern classical musician would look at the music. So it's knowing the right accent.
Yeah.
First of all, knowing the right language. What language are we in? Which century? And then the language of the composer, and then the colloquialisms and the turns of phrase, which become more and more personal from one composer to another at the time.
So do you feel that there's a lot of influence from the spoken language so if you have a familiarity with the spoken language of the composer, it's going to actually influence the different accent. I know that's true all the way through music even, but is it especially true in Baroque when things weren't written down to really
I think so, very strongly. I think so, because the musician and theorist Brossard from 17th century said musicians are musical orators.
Oh, I love that.
And the whole idea of playing music was to move the listener. And so the figurations that you would create as a composer mirrored speech patterns, mirrored things like sighs. So if you heard ta-dum, ki-dum, ta-dum, you know, that's almost a universal thing, that's not happy music.
Right.
It's not going to be sad. So they use these formulas of different note combinations, different rhythms, in a way to make the music rhetorical. And any composer of the time and any musician of the time knew all the rules of oration and rhetoric. So if you're going to repeat something in a musical phrase, let's say 3 times, which is the magic number, you don't do it the same way 3 times.
Can you give me your foghorn leghorn example that I steal from you all the time?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I say that's no chickens. I'll show you a real chicken. So, not a very good time.
I remember being in a chorus rehearsal with you, and you said, I say, boy.
That's
and
right.
I fell off my chair.
Or if your mother's saying to you, you know, when you're a kid, go clean your room,
right.
She's not going to say it the same the second time. The voice will lower, go clean your room. And the third time will probably go clean. So same words, repetition, you do something. So all these rhetorical devices, composers and players would be familiar with. And the idea was that it was like a language, and that through inflection, even to the point of a down bow and an up bow on a string instrument being different, that the down bow will be stronger and the up bow will be weaker, just as it is in Anglo-Saxon languages. If you think of Jesu meine Freude,
Right.
yeah, it's not da 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 da. For the French, it's different. They have long and short. The language is very horizontal.
More legato, yeah.
But it has a long and a short, which you must then do the same thing in your playing.
So you don't want to mix up the stress with the length. You can have stress in short and stress in long. I know from working in opera that we always have to think about that in terms of the language that we're working in.
Yeah.
Then Ivars, how does speak a little? Can you give us a little bit more of how the instruments changed from when you talked about original instruments or modern instruments? What are some of the things that we have to think about when you're playing Baroque music with a modern instrument, and why?
Okay, so I'll work backwards like a time machine going backwards. So we'll start with the modern violin. Let's say you have an old instrument, maybe 18th century violin, really precious. If you wanted to negate what wasn't there originally, take off the neck, take off the bridge, take out inside. There's something called a bass bar, which is a kind of rib support. Remove that. Remove the sound post inside, which helps the vibrations. Remove the strings. Remove the chin rest for sure. What are you left with? You're left with the body and the scroll at the end, the beautiful curlicue thing on the end of the neck. That's all that's original about your instrument that you are now holding in the 21st century. And the whole point of that was this idea that the composers wanted more sound.
Right.
So if we look at a Baroque violin or hear a Baroque violin, its structure is very light. It's not meant to produce big sound. It's an articulate. It's like you and me speaking now. It's not like doing a speech to
3,000 people.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what they mean. They were playing in smaller places, right? Like in the courtyard
well.
or in the
Of
country
course.
square, or
Yeah,
not. They weren't
yeah.
filling a 3,000 seat theater.
No, so the idea of projection was not part of it at all. And so the instruments were also strung with what we call catgut, which was actually sheep. The sort of the modern equivalent of that on guitars is what we have, the nylon strings. But before that, it would be gut, sheep gut, intestines wound tightly, dried, which create a much softer sound. So people who are still around, pre-World War II or even World War II, if you listen to the great violinists like Heifetz played on a gut E. He did not have a solid steel E string, the top one.
So it wasn't as vibrant then. It had
well, vibrant I wouldn't use. It wasn't as direct and steely a sound. It was a softer sound.
A warmer sound.
I think, yeah. And so the gut strings were pretty well all the way down to the bottom string. Because of the thickness, they didn't speak well. So they've quickly discovered that you wind metal wire around it to give it more strings. We still have modern strings where you have a gut core with metal. And then there was less tension because if you look at the body of this is the body of the violin from a side view, and the neck on a Baroque violin is this way. It's just the same angle. If you want to create more tension, you tilt the neck down, and therefore that puts more pressure on the strings. Therefore, you need a stronger bridge. The bridge that holds up the strings was very open. They had to make it denser. They had to make it hold now the pressure that you're adding by adding that extra angle. Then the neck wouldn't hold because the old necks were just nailed in. They weren't even mortised in as they do now. They were just put 3 nails in, and that's that. So it was a development to add more tension to the instrument to make it brighter and to make it speak louder. But
so
in that you lose.
Right, it changes the sound then. But so then when you're working with an orchestra who has primarily modern instruments in their setup, what do you do to try and recreate that initial sound?
Well, that comes to what you do with the violin that you're holding here, what you do with the bow.
Right.
And again, the modern bow is built for sound right from one end to the other. They are concave. The wood of the bow is concave, which puts tension on the end, the tip of the bow, so that you can play right to the tip and you still have strength. The Baroque bow is convex. It's like an archer's bow, not hugely exaggerated. The very old ones are, but therefore it has no tension at the tip, and the tip of the bow looks like a swan's head. It's just a point, or pike head. So when you play with a Baroque bow, there's a natural tendency for the sound to decay as you get to the tip. Also, it has the hair isn't a flat ribbon of horsehair. It's just a rope because it isn't flattened out. It's just a rope of hair.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so it's a rounder. So it's grabbing the strings in a different way.
Right.
So when you realize that you're using a bow that is meant to be a sound maker and not
a
an
dancer
of speech, you have to do things with the modern bow. It was understood that the Baroque language was more articulate, but in the 1940s and 50s, musicians started getting fed up with the soup, the gravy that was going on in symphony orchestras.
The thickness of the repertoire.
When they played Baroque music, it was as romantic and thick and rich as Brahms. And so there was a strong reaction against that, with groups like the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields and Neville Marriner, Karl Richter in Germany, And they decided the music sounds as though it should be more, dum bum da da dim da da dum bum bum. And so they developed a style of bowing with a modern bow right at the tip, a very stiff kind of bowing, martelet bowing, which makes each note go.
Right.
And because you're at the tip, there isn't much gradation of what you can do with that. So all of a sudden we didn't have soup anymore, but we had something that was very precise, very mathematically wonderful and brilliant, but it was all the same.
Right.
Every note the same. And that's what 19th and 20th century teachers, even 21st century, every note must sound
The same.
whether it's an up or a
So
down,
boring.
and vibrate. So vibrato
Right.
was another thing. That's a fad that already was, you can trace it back to the 1830s, 1820s, but it's just like denim jeans. Are we going to wear flares, or is it low rise, high rise, skinny, bleached, raw?
One size doesn't fit all, right?
No. And so if you realize that vibrato was a fad, the idea that we now say that it's a part of the sound
Every note. Yeah.
isn't true for other decades, for other centuries.
Right.
So you asked me, that's a long answer.
No, but I think, and I mean, I know a much bigger answer. Like, I can't wait.
So
I get the benefit of watching you in rehearsal too. And I know our musicians are super excited to hear, just to be drawn into your expertise, because it's so ingrained in your study and in your practice. And that's what I love watching you.
The other way of playing is kind of ingrained in a regular symphony orchestra player,
yes,
unless they've dabbled in it.
Yeah, and we have quite a few dabblers, so I'm especially excited for them to work with you. Now, when it comes to conducting, then what is your? Because I remember when you said that you were from the self-described Fred Astaire School of Conducting, which I love, because you really are a dancer on the podium. And I've seen conductors that dance on the podium because they're very conscious of how that appears to the audience. Yeah. And nothing could be further from the truth with you. You're so inside the music. Yeah. And it really does become so much less about showing a 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern. And so much about showing the gesture of the music, which we're already sort of alluding to in terms of the language and the speech and the rhetoric.
Right.
So how do you, let's take it back to conducting then, because I know you've done a ton of playing as well in this style. Where is your inspiration in conducting this repertoire? How are you using the gesture of conducting to inspire this style of playing, especially with an orchestra that's not a specialist in this style?
Well, there's two elements, and if I get to work with a group for any length of time, like I did with Calgary Philharmonic for 10 years, the first years was a learning curve, right, for most of the players. And there were certain quick fixes one can do. Play in this part of the bow, don't shift up high, and play in higher positions, especially on lower things, because it starts sounding like this.
You want the strings to ring, right? Yeah.
So there's little quick fixes, but over the years with the Calgary Philharmonic, they learned this new language. So then I didn't have to talk about how or where to play things. But that was also part and parcel with the fact that I mark the parts, the orchestral parts, so that it looks like a Mahler symphony at times. And that is purely to save time, having to repeat, okay, now this note has to be strong and this one is weak. You don't have time to explain the whys and wherefores. So I developed a series of signs, more than just bowing, more than just dynamics, to show shapes, to show a note that's stressed. I would use an oblique line, right? For something that's weak, I'd use a cup shape like you do for a short vowel.
Yeah.
And then my famous squiggly line, which basic translation is do something. You have a line here, you see where the music's going, do something, use your fantasy. I think fantasy is the main watchword. If you look at a modern printed edition of the Bach cello suites, you see everything according to an engraving or a printing where the stems, the bars, everything is square. The only round thing are the notes. But Bach's shapes,
You see the shape. Yeah.
If you look at a manuscript, Anna Magdalena's manuscript of the cello suites, you start seeing these gestures.
Yeah.
Because pen and ink, I'm going to give you another metaphor. And that ties in with my conducting gesture. So Tafelmusik, many years ago when I was still playing in the orchestra, we did our first tour to China. And we were invited in Beijing. We did concert there, but we were invited to the Beijing Conservatory.
Wonderful.
And I was asked to coach the conservatory orchestra through an interpreter. And so, and it was going to be an hour long, and they wanted to know everything about Baroque performance practice.
In 1 hour through an interpreter.
So we decided, okay, we're going to send them music in advance with markings and bowings. So we picked some dance movements from Handel's Water Music, the famous Water Music. It was just a string ensemble, sent them in advance. And then the day arrived and I went to the conservatory. I had an interpreter, but on the flight over, I'm looking at a flight magazine and I'm thinking, how am I going to describe this? Especially through language. And there was one page with a kanji, Chinese letters, a bunch of them, done in our equivalent of Helvetica. So the plain old Helvetica font, it's like using a magic marker. It's all the same no matter what direction you go.
Right.
There's no lovely decoration. There's no serifs. There's no thin and thick that you get in Roman. If you're into fonts, I'm a serif guy. Right?
Okay.
I love the difference between something that's heavy and something that's thin, and the decoration of capping with serifs. So think Helvetica in Chinese kanji, Mandarin. And then I flipped a page and there was a page that had kanji, different kanji, but done with a brush, a Chinese brush and ink. And it was completely free form, and it had rough edges at the ends. You could see the separate hairs. And I went, yeah, that's it. That is it exactly. The modern playing is Helvetica. Everything is
perfect in it, yeah.
And it doesn't matter what it's saying. It's done the same way. Whereas the freedom of using a brush and ink is the freedom that we have playing with more fantasy, playing with the Baroque bows, where the difference between a down and up is there. It's again going back to language. And so I decided I had it printed out and I showed them the two. I said, this is how you started playing it. I want you to play it now like this.
And what happened?
It changed.
Wow.
They were brilliant.
That's amazing.
My nightmare was that I was with the interpreter and I would say something and then he would tell them. And this went for about half an hour. And then I said something and there was silence. And I looked over and he was gone. And our manager said, oh, he had to go somewhere, but that's okay. The conductor of the symphony will take over, but he only speaks German.
Oh dear.
So,
you're translating to German, he's translating to Chinese.
I had to speak to him in my concepts in German. My brain was fried. Total omelet. But that was it. It's learning a different way. It's just like a classical trained musician trying to play jazz.
Yeah. Being
able to loosen up, being able to say, no, that notation, that length of that note will not be that. Just loosen it up. Understand that a dot can mean 5 different things.
Well, and that's where we get that freedom, and that's when I watch you conduct. It's never the same way twice, and And so there's like, as a listener, as someone, I just can't wait to be in the audience, and I get to see it 3 times. Just to see the freedom that you bring to the podium. And that's why I love when you said for the Fred Astaire School of Conducting, because you're not binding yourself into a convention of what a conductor should be doing, and you really are dancing the music.
Yep.
I mean, I see the shapes in what you're creating, and it's inspired me a lot. And I think that I inadvertently maybe have brought that into my conducting, even when it's romantic repertoire or contemporary repertoire. So that you're not, the last thing you want to do is sort of be square up there. It really is about lifting the music off the page, and so that the audience feels that excitement and the enthusiasm of the original intention. And I'm so excited for you to be here. I hope that everybody just drops everything and comes to check out this show. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit before we close, to just tell us a little bit about, because this show is completely curated by Ivars and all the choices. It's such a wonderful concept of taking scores that were on Bach's library and on his shelf. We updated it and called it his playlist, which is just sort of fun. But just tell me a little bit about how you came to this concept, or what you're most excited about, the connections and the sort of overall shape of what we're going to hear.
Well, years back, I was looking through some books on Bach, and they had not only a list of the music that was in his library, because he had an extensive personal library of theological books, not just of music, but of all different subjects, and then music as well. So that was one thing, and that was quite an interesting list to see the other composers that he'd either copied out by hand himself or had received copies, because of course there's no photocopy machine. Some of this music was engraved and printed, but not much. So it'd be stuff that was passed down and recopied and copied by him himself. So there was that, his library. And then there was the music that he performed throughout his life and career, especially in Leipzig, where he was the Thomas Cantor, the Kapellmeister, music master of St. Thomas's Church. He was also responsible for teaching the musicians in the town, and he created what was called the Collegium Musicum, a musical ensemble of university students and his family, so his sons would be involved as well.
He did have 21 children, so he had a few to choose.
He had a good lineup there. But it was really meant to be an outlet for these musicians in university to get together and play. And what's the neat thing is it was like really truly like a jam session. They would meet in the Zimmermann's coffee house. Coffee had become all the rage at that time. It was the new drug. And they would literally have jam sessions of playing music in Zimmermann's cafe house, everyone smoking and drinking this wonderful liquor. And he needed music, therefore. So it wasn't just his own music. He obtained music by, well, I can give you some of the list. Some of his ancestors. He had also started creating a collection called the Old Bach Archive. So compositions by his ancestors and relatives. And he was drawing from that. He performed pieces by Handel, by Pergolesi, by Telemann, Albinoni, Italian music, German music, you name it, Bohemian music. If it tweaked his interest, he thought that would be a great piece to play. And so there was a wide variety of pieces that they performed. In summertime, they would also twice a week do outdoor concerts. And so between the list of pieces that I found in the list of what was in his library and the pieces that they actually performed, which they know about, I chose and grabbed and put together this kind of banquet of what you might hear if you were in Leipzig with the Collegium playing, with Bach leading. And so there's only one Bach piece represented, and even that is not a piece really of his own making. It's an inspiration of his appreciation and understanding of Italian music. And so when he was right at the beginning of his career as a young composer in Weimar, the Duke there had a music collection, and that Duke had purchased the printed edition of Vivaldi's Opus 3, L'Estro Armonico. And Bach was able to see this and glean, oh my goodness. And he was, in a way, that was the root, the plinth of building his own style, taking the Italian model. His Brandenburg Concertos, you could say, are Italian in style. So he liked to do transcriptions of Vivaldi works that were originally for strings and make them keyboard works. So you would see a whole collection of Vivaldi concertos that were transcribed for organ in those early years. Later on, he did a transcription of one of the 4 violin concertos of Vivaldi for 4 harpsichords, again for himself and for his kids to play along. But then he decided to write a piece called the Italian Concerto, which is a keyboard work, which is his own invention. It isn't transcribing someone else's music. It's his own invention of a piece for keyboard in Italian style. And what I've done, together with my wife Charlotte, we turned it upside down and created a work that might be the Italian original. So we've arranged it for strings, which gives you an idea of what these other Italian pieces that he arranged for keyboard would have sounded like. So we've gone backwards, and it was amazing to delve into that and realize that, okay, now we have to compose something, because it's a little threadbare.
Because you got more than 2 hands now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that is the only representation of Bach on the program. But what you get to see is what he was familiar with, the music that he admired by other composers, which for me is something, if you think about composers, you won't find them playing other people's music. Like if you think of Handel, the great opera composer, impresario himself, you will not find him, maybe in a season he will have put someone else's opera as director of one of the opera companies, but he's concentrating on his own music. So this, even though Bach knew already his genius, if you will, and his work, he still embraced other composers and learned from them as well.
Which is why he has such a synthesis, right? Of you find everything in
French style, Italian style, his understanding of form and structure, which makes the Brandenburg Concertos as interesting as they are.
Right, because there's such variety.
Yeah. So that's the premise of this concert, and I'll be guiding you through it with short little chats about what you're hearing next, and who this composer. Some of the composers you won't even maybe know. Stefani, I didn't know who Stefani was 4 years ago, thanks to Cecilia Bartoli, the famous soprano. She rediscovered him and started performing the amazing music that he wrote. These lost operas that are sitting in the Royal Collection in the British Museum.
Wow.
That people are now discovering. You can go to Boston, the Early Music Festival. They are now mounting these productions of operas. He was the mentor of Handel.
Okay.
In Germany. But he was the Kapellmeister for the Elector of Hanover, who became George I of England. So I love also all these connections that we get between the people. We always like to put things in boxes very neatly, and you find that there's always some sort of connection where you least expect it. So
I know, because I've had the great pleasure of watching many of your performances and really the honor of working with you in rehearsals. I know what a treat we are all in for here, yours. Just even today, just learning so much from you, but also the way that you conceive of a performance and the whole narrative that comes with it is an unforgettable experience for every one of us that's going to be in the audience. So I really am so excited. I'm so excited for you to finally be able to be on our stage after 2 years of getting you here. And I'm just so I know that everyone that comes is just going to have such an eye-opening and heart-lifting experience, and we certainly all use that, given everything that has gone in the world.
Well, I don't know, when the first notes sound and I'm up there, you can expect emotions to flow from me, because it's been 2 years, more than that. December 2019 was the last time I guest conducted anything, that Messiah performance in Vancouver.
So will this be your first guest conducting
First
since
guest
then?
conducting that.
So well, we'll make it a wonderful experience for you. I'll tell you, the first time I got on the podium to work with my musicians, I wept, and I had to really pull myself together to be able to do the rehearsal. I was just like, I think they were all a little worried. But I totally get it. I mean, I think that it's so soul enriching for us in what we get to do, that when it was taken away, it was, I mean, we'll talk about that when you're here over many glasses of wine.
Yes.
I do want to let our wonderful listeners today know that we have one more series in the fall, Maestros Musings, and I'm going to be speaking on December the 2nd with Jennifer Tong, who is one of my mentees. I have the honor of being an official mentor in the relatively new Women in Musical Leadership Program, national initiative that was started by Tapestry Opera in Toronto with partners from the Toronto Symphony Orchestra and Pacific Opera Victoria. And so you're going to be seeing a conductor from the beginning of her career, and gives all kinds of insights about this Women in Musical Leadership Program, which I'm very proud to be associated with. But for today, just so grateful to you, Ivars. I'm so pins and needles now with excitement about you coming, and just getting to see this extraordinary performance, watch you work with our musicians. I know they're all very excited, and I know that you will endear yourself to our audience many times over. So thank you for being with me today for Maestros Musings. Thank you to everybody else for tuning in. And if you haven't got your ticket yet for Bach's playlist, just November, what month are we in? November 19th in Kelowna, 20th in Vernon, 21st matinee at 2 p.m. in Penticton at the Cleveland Theatre. Please join us. Ivars, thank you so much for your time today and all your expertise and just your absolute delight in what you do. It's totally infectious, and I'm super grateful. So thank you, everybody.